Welcome to the Climate Cafe, the Climate Cafe Multi-Faith, where we talk about that intersection between faith and environmental justice, creation justice, climate change. There's a lot of different terms in there, but some of us are more comfortable with some terms than others. And I just couldn't be more glad to introduce Toastie Oaster as our guest today. So Toastie is a staff writer for the High Country News. They're really telling on the ground stories in a really helpful way. Their journalism has appeared in a number of publications, including Street Roots, Underscore News, the Portland Mercury, Willamette Week, Columbia Insight, and Foreign Policy Magazine, and has won awards from the Native American Journalists Association and the Society of Professional Journalists in Oregon. And they were awarded ProPublica's Local Reporting Network grant to continue their investigation into, and this is where I really just feeling it right here, the green colonialism in the Pacific Northwest. And boy, I am just so glad to welcome you, Toastie. And I want to turn it over to you and just let you open it up wherever you want to go next.
Yakoki Rishinda Halito Ankana Sachifoya Toastie. High Country News Solasochi Sia Michachata Sia Okay. I said, thank you, Rishinda. My name is Toastie. I'm a writer for High Country News and I'm Choctaw. My pronouns are they, them, and I appreciate that introduction. That was very kind. Thank you for a very thorough introduction to my work. So I'm very excited to be joining all of you today. I'm going to talk about green colonialism, and I was going to start just by kind of describing what green colonialism is, but it seems like y'all have a pretty good handle on that. You've been talking about copper mines and lithium mines. I think maybe you know what's going on in the world. So I can address that later if anybody has any questions, but I'll just go ahead and start talking more specifically then about Goldendale, because what happened is last year, my editors and I undertook an investigation on this renewable energy development project near Goldendale, Washington, which is just over the Columbia River from Oregon, where I live. And it's in this kind of sagebrush steppe land it's the treaty lands of the Yakama Nation, one of the bigger tribes in Eastern Washington. Washington has, I think, 29 federally recognized tribes. The Yakama Nation is one of the biggest. And the project being proposed for development out there is a pumped hydro storage facility. And essentially it doesn't generate energy like a wind farm or a solar farm does. It's designed to store excess energy that comes during times of abundant wind energy that would otherwise go to waste. So it basically, like during the springtime, when all the wind turbines up on the windy ridge overlooking the river, they're all going and going and going. Now, this is according to the developer. I have to caveat this a little bit. The developer told me this, so take it with a grain of salt. But the way that they described the project to me is that when all of those wind turbines are going, sometimes there's an excess of energy that can actually more than can be used. So some of those turbines just get turned off because there's so much wind that with this dearth of electricity, there's nowhere for it to go on the grid. They max out the capacity of the grid. So that it's essentially wasted energy. And they, if only they had a place to put that energy for later when it's not windy and people still need energy, wouldn't that be great? So the idea is to reroute all that extra energy into a pump, and the pump will use that extra energy to draw water from the Columbia River and pump it up a hill. And it's going to store it up on the top of the hill in this 60-acre reservoir, right? And there it will sit until later on when the winds have died down or there's cloud coverage, so there's not good solar capability or whatever, and people still need to light their homes and what have you, they can release that water from the reservoir down back through the same tunnel, and it'll go through a turbine and turn back into electrical energy that goes back to the grid to power homes. And then the water that after it goes down through the turbine is collected in a second 60-acre reservoir at a lower, like right on the edge of the riverbank. So there's two reservoirs at an elevation difference, and they're connected by a tunnel that has a pump and a turbine inside the tunnel. So that's the idea behind pumped hydro storage. It's not especially new, although it hasn't been widely implemented. This particular spot, the particular spot is called Juniper Ridge or Juniper Point, I believe, but it's part of an area that the Yakima people call Pushpum. And Pushpum is, it's a culturally significant site for the Yakima Nation. And it was originally scoped out for pumped hydro storage by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in the late 60s. And things didn't go that direction at the time. Part of that land was developed for an aluminum smelter instead, which Lockheed Martin ran just down on the riverbank below the ridge, sort of right by the John Day Dam, if you know what the John Day Dam is. So they, ran this smelter for decades and got some good jobs for folks in Klickitat County and caused terrible pollution problems, and then went bankrupt in the mid to late aughts, I believe. It was after this aluminum smelter went bankrupt that these plans for pumped hydro storage started resurfacing. So I went out to investigate this place because the Yakima Nation has been adamant about their opposition. Before I get into all that, I'll just pause and see, should I save questions for the end, or I'm happy to just pause and take questions now, whatever works best. I don't want to move through this all too fast if anybody wants to.
I think it's fine. If anybody has a question, I encourage you to use the raised hand feature. I think that the Goldendale project may not be as familiar to some of the folks on the call as to me, and I say that I even have a lot to learn. So yeah, I think don't be shy about kind of explaining the project, but no, you're awesome. And if it's great that you don't mind if people use the raised hand feature while you're talking, then we'll just say that right now, and then we're set.
Please, please. I'll keep my eye out for your raised hands. And feel free to interrupt me if my internet freezes up or something. So the developers of this pumped hydro storage project, the way that they went about this was the landowner and the county really wanted this to become a thing, that they were going to do this pumped hydro thing. And they collaborated about it. The county tried to develop it themselves, and it didn't work out. So eventually they brought in a developer called Rye Development, who's from the East Coast. And that's who the project proponent is now. But they worked on this project for 9 years, between 2008 and 2017. And it was only after 9 years that when they filed for federal applications for federal permits, that information, that awareness of the project at all became public information. So in other words, nobody notified the tribes for 9 years. And then after 9 years, they still didn't notify the tribes. They just notified the federal government, and the federal government makes that information public. And so the tribes found out passively because of a public announcement from FERC, which is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They're in Washington, D.C., and they're supposed to regulate hydro projects. So when FERC announced, Rye Development has applied for federal permits to build pumped hydro storage at Goldendale, Washington. The Yakama Nation suddenly had, I think it was 30 days, 60 days. Let me see if I can be accurate here. Look it up. They had 60 days to respond, basically, and issue any objections that they might have. Now, so you've got to think about this logistically. A tribe learns that there's this development proposed on their land, and they've got to figure out, what's there archaeologically, what's there in terms of first foods, endangered species, other environmental concerns, do they use it for ceremony? There's all of these considerations, and they don't just write these things down off the cuff. They've got to go survey the grounds. They've got to send out their TIPOs, their tribal historic preservation officers. They've got to do environmental surveys. They have to do cultural and archaeological surveys. They have to get lawyers involved to study the laws. We're talking manpower and time that this takes. Now, of course, the developers and the landowners have had 9 years to build momentum, to invest financially, and they're flush. These are, multi-million dollar. It's a multi-million-dollar company. So they've brought a lot of money into this. They've already brought a lot of research. They've already, spent years doing this, and then bam, 60 days. What do you have to say about it, tribes? So you can tell from the outset that it's a system that's designed to disadvantage the tribes. Since then, the Yakama Nation has been very staunch and very outspoken in their opposition to this particular project. Now, that's not to say that that opposition extends to all renewable energy infrastructure. The tribe was very clear with me when I spoke to officials there that they support renewable infrastructure. They want, like everybody else, they want to get off of fossil fuels. Who is more of a champion of the environment than indigenous people? I mean, of course they are, in favor of renewable energy. The problem for them is the way that it's being done, which is in this sort of colonialist way that, sort of automatically puts them on the defense. And this particular spot, push pump, which is sacred to them. And that is where we come to one of the really sticky issues about the Goldendale project. Because the public and government entities want to know, well, what's the problem? Why can't we develop this here? And the Yakama Nation has a whole list of environmental concerns. They also gather food there. It's a regenerative seed bank for these endemic root species that are first foods and medicines for the different bands and tribes of the Yakama Nation, particularly the Rock Creek band. And so the Rock Creek people go there, every year to dig roots. And, that's a really important element, of course, because gathering first foods is one of the last things that allows indigenous people to keep from becoming fully dependent on capitalist infrastructure like grocery stores. Natives still go to grocery stores, but if not for treaty protected rights to hunt, fish, and gather foods, we would probably face total assimilation. I don't think that would be overstating things. And so these protected root gathering spaces and fishing and hunting spaces are very important in perpetuating native cultures. So that's one of the things that they really highlight, pretty hard, is that it's a root gathering spot. Excuse me, and how important that is. But there are also spiritual concerns about this site. And what those spiritual concerns are, I don't know, because it's not public knowledge and they won't share it with anyone. And I didn't ask them to share it with me. I don't want to. I'm a conduit to the public. So if you don't want the public to know, don't tell me. And they're very, they have, spiritual elements and cultural spiritual practices and cultural practices that, you know, if they did become public, of course, would be under threat of commodification by the general public, or who knows, like any is a whole, you know, use your imagination of ways that that could go awry if, you know, the public got wind of tribal cultural practices. So it's important that they have confidentiality about some of those concerns. And the trouble with that is that what's supposed to happen is there's supposed to be government consultation about issues such as environmental concerns, spiritual ceremonial concerns, root gathering, etc. Now, the Yagam Nation told me that at a state level, the state of Washington is conducting consultation the way that they're supposed to. Whether or not that consultation is adequate or meaningful or effective, that's another issue. But Washington state does seem to have been conducting consultation. However, that's for state permits. For federal permits, there has to be federal consultation as well. And FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which I mentioned earlier, is the federal entity that is supposed to step in and consult with the Yakama Nation. They haven't done it. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The first thing that FERC did was they told the developer, well, you're going to be our stand-in for consultation. So you go talk to the tribes and we'll call it good. And of course, the Yakama Nation was basically like, well, we're a sovereign government and we can only conduct formal government to government consultation with another sovereign government. And Rye Development is a corporation. It's not a sovereign government. So we'll talk to them. We'll certainly like exchange information with them, but that does not qualify as formal government to government consultation, which the United States is treaty obligated to conduct in a case like this with the tribe. So that was the first problem with federal consultation. The second one that we found was that FERC seems to perceive itself, even though it's a regulatory body, it seems to perceive itself as a sort of quasi-judicial entity. And so they have this rule that they call Rule 2201. I call it Catch 2201 because it's really Catch 22. But they've written this rule for themselves that they cannot enter into what they call ex parte communications with either the project proponent or the project's opposition, project opponents. And that ex parte just means that they can't talk to one party without including the other. So it basically means that they won't keep any information confidential. They take all of everything from their hearings and their consultations and whatever, and they document it and they file it in a public place on their website, where if you're a nosy reporter, for example, you can go and just download it from their website and read it all if you want to read some really boring documents. And
wait, just to clarify, is this FERC? We're talking about FERC? Yeah.
Yep. FERC's website has memorandums and meeting minutes and everything from all their meetings that they conduct with developers and tribes for projects like these. So, the Yakama Nation appealed to FERC to say, look, we can't put some of this stuff on the public record, this, sensitive spiritual information. We need to be able to conduct consultation in culturally appropriate circumstances. And FERC's response to that was basically that they're bound, our hands are tied, there's nothing we can do, we're bound by this rule. Again, it's a rule that they made up themselves. And they said, but they said this in a formal letter back to the Yakama Nation. They said, but if, we do endeavor to work with tribes as best we can. So here's what we'll do for you. You can take all that confidential information and just file it in an envelope marked confidential, send it to us that way, but we're going to share it with everybody anyway. So, and then they gave a third option. They were like, okay, if you really, really, really want to keep it confidential and really don't want anyone to see that information, the best thing to do is just keep it to yourself and don't consult, and that's it. So that's kind of where things have stood with federal consultation. It hasn't happened, as far as I know. It hadn't happened at the time of publishing. I don't think it has still, because FERC is unwilling to conduct consultation in culturally appropriate circumstances. So, Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, this is fascinating to me. I'm a lawyer and I've done some work around energy projects in the past, nothing currently. And I'm wondering about the First Amendment issue. It seems to me that the ability to practice your religion should take priority over sort of the procedural, whatever rule. I guess they're trying to make it into more substantive than a procedural thing, but has there been a discussion about that or about a legal challenge of just that particularly?
That's a really interesting point. And it does seem to me also to be that way, that, you would think that would be protected. The way that the tribe seems to have been going about it is using the legal strategies supported by either the treaty itself, which is the Treaty of 1855, which protects root gatherings specifically by name, or protecting endangered species and environmental concerns, because there are litigatable tools there available to them. The right to practice ceremony and religion is not in the treaty, because in theory, it's a human right that supersedes treaties, and it would be insultingly diminishing to put that into a treaty, because that's not something that someone should have to negotiate for, right? That's just a human right. So, I mean, yeah, it should, it should, if the US had a track record of honoring human rights, but I think that track record is spotty, to put it generously. The way that people have been talking about how to circumvent all this is to replace this idea of consultation, which is kind of it's kind of a mushy term, consultation. It's something that can be effective and can be meaningful, but in practice is often just a venue for tribes to air their gripes before they're dispossessed or before their rights are trodden upon. And replacing this idea of consultation as the standard with a new standard of free, prior, and informed consent. Now, that standard has been adopted by the UN, and the US, I believe, has sort of verbally acknowledged that sounds great and all, but the US does not recognize a tribe's right to consent or withhold consent to development on sacred sites. The UN says that the US should, and that's where the conversation is really happening, is the idea between consultation versus consent, because reforming consultation has happened again and again. It's happening in the state of Washington right now. There's all of this consultation reform that's supposed to be taking place even this month. And it all, it doesn't, I think even the best consultation frameworks stop short of offering the tribes any kind of veto power. And without veto power, they don't actually have power. They don't actually have the right to say yay or nay to this. One of the other people who could stop this is Governor Inslee, or the incoming governor, whoever that's going to be. Because at a state level, like I said, this permit needs federal and state, this project in Goldendale needs federal permits. It also needs state permits. And the whole state permitting process ultimately comes down to agency recommendations to the governor, and the governor says yay or nay. So Inslee could stop it. That's why, if petitioning FERC is a losing game because they're this strange like shadow agency or whatever, then it could go to the governor. There are people who can stop this. And when we spoke to the developers, representatives of Bragg Development, they did a lot of these like deferring, denying their power, kind of tactics, which is just classic, colonizer stuff. Like, oh, we don't have it's not up to us, basically, like we don't have the power to decide if this gets built here or gets built somewhere else, and that's just that's kind of a typical, that's something that we've seen colonial entities doing in Native communities for hundreds of years. And they used other sort of elements from the colonial toolkit as well. They sort of laced their descriptions with this tone of inevitability, like, well, it's progress. What can you do? Oh, it's so sad. For Native cultures that everybody deserves to be heard and deserves to participate in this process. But if we don't do this, then somebody else will, basically, which is, of course, familiar again to Native communities from Manifest Destiny. Like, oh, this is just the inevitable march of progress, and Indians are in the way. So, and of course, that's not how it is. They like I said, the Yakama Nation is very pro renewable energy. And Indigenous people are safeguarding 80% of Earth's biodiversity. The most biodiverse places on Earth are Indigenous lands. Nobody cares for the land better than its Indigenous people. And if there was some kind of at least a partnership model where tribes were partners, if not leaders, in the renewable energy shift, we would be having very different conversations that wouldn't be framing Native communities and tribes as being in the way of progress, which is how colonizers want it to look, so that when they decide to create sacrifice zones on Native lands, they can justify that.